What happens when both people stop reaching out? No texts, no calls, no small check-ins. At first, it can feel calm, even strong. You tell yourself if they wanted to talk, they would. And somewhere on the other side, they may be thinking the exact same thing. But here is the part most people miss. Mutual silence is never neutral. It is not peace. It is not closure. And it is definitely not always strength. Silence becomes a private battle. Every unanswered day creates new questions. Did I matter? Are they done with me? Should I say something? Or will that make me look weak? From the outside, everything looks quiet. On the inside, feelings get louder. For some people, silence creates curiosity. It builds tension. It even increases attraction for a while. For others, it slowly turns into emotional distance. And the worst part is that most people do not know which one is happening until the damage is already done. This stage, when neither person reaches out, often decides everything. It can pull two people back together, or it can let them drift apart without one honest goodbye. So before you treat silence like it means nothing, you need to see what it is really doing to both of you. Because what looks like nothing is often changing everything. And if you stay with me, you will see why this quiet phase can shape the whole ending without either person saying a single word. By this point, the silence is usually not random, it is chosen. Even if neither person says that out loud, both of them stop reaching out because contact suddenly feels dangerous. One message can reopen feelings, it can shift the balance, it can expose hurt, hope, or need that neither side feels ready to show. So instead of speaking, both people step back and wait for the other one to move first. Pride plays a bigger role here than most admit. Reaching out can feel like losing, like saying, I care more, like handing the other person proof that they still have emotional power over you, and no one wants to be the one carrying more weight in silence. So both stay quiet and call it control, when really it is often fear wearing the clothes of strength. Then there is the story each person tells themselves. If they wanted to talk, they would. That thought becomes the excuse. Waiting stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a principle. And once pride attaches itself to silence, breaking it gets harder with every day. There is also self-protection. Reaching out means risking rejection, coldness, or the painful truth that the bond may not matter anymore. Silence feels safer than hearing something that confirms your worst fear. Sometimes one person wants space so longing can grow, while the other is trying to heal and pull themselves back together. The reasons are different, but the result is the same. Nothing happens. And that is why mutual silence is so misleading. On the surface, it looks like disinterest. Underneath it, there is often unresolved emotion, unspoken need, and two people waiting for reassurance that neither one is brave enough to ask for. When a man goes into silence, his reaction often does not look dramatic at first. It is usually more mental than emotional in the beginning. He tells himself the distance makes sense. He focuses on routine, work, distractions, or whatever helps him feel steady. On the surface, he looks fine, maybe even calmer than before. But silence does not remove emotion, it delays it. And that delay matters. As the days pass, questions begin to show up. He starts wondering if she moved on, if the silence affected her at all, if he meant as much as he once believed. Because he often does not speak these thoughts, they stay inside and repeat, and when thoughts repeat in silence, they grow stronger. One important shift happens when interaction disappears. No messages, no reactions, no emotional feedback. Without that contact, his sense of importance can start to feel uncertain. Many men connect emotionally through interaction itself. So when that contact is gone, confidence can slowly turn into doubt. Then memories come back. Specific ones, a certain conversation, a certain look, a small moment he ignored at the time and now cannot stop replaying. The emotional hit often comes later, not earlier. That is what makes this stage easy to misunderstand. He may not feel the full loss right away, but once the silence starts to feel permanent instead of temporary, it lands differently. Now he feels the tension between pride and fear. Reaching out feels like giving up control. Staying silent feels like risking something real. If the bond was deep, silence can create longing and reflection. If it was weak, indifference slowly takes over, so his silence does not always mean he does not care. Sometimes it means he is trying to manage attachment, ego, and fear without letting any of it show. For a woman, silence often hits faster and more emotionally at the start. When contact stops, the first response is usually not numbness, it is awareness. She feels the absence right away. Not only the absence of the person, but the absence of the emotional rhythm that used to exist. The quiet feels loud. Her mind begins filling that space with meaning, possibilities, and questions. At first, she may go back over everything, every talk, every text, every shift in tone, every moment that now seems like it could have meant more. This is not always obsession. Often it is the mind trying to create clarity where none exists. She wants to know whether this silence is temporary, intentional, or final. Because what hurts most is usually not the lack of contact itself, it is the uncertainty around it. As time goes on, the emotional response starts to change. If silence continues, self-respect begins to rise beside the desire for connection. She may want to reach out, but she is also aware of her value, and that creates a painful split inside. The wish to reconnect on one side, the fear of looking unwanted on the other. Silence pushes her toward a choice, keep hoping or protect herself, and that choice is never light. Beneath the surface, something else is happening too. Emotional attachment starts reorganizing. If no reassurance comes, her feelings begin protecting her from more pain. Hope turns cautious, curiosity turns guarded. Then guardedness can become distance. She may look fine from the outside, strong, settled, but inside she is not always finding peace. She may be building walls, and that is why silence can be risky. If she feels unseen for too long, detachment stops being a choice and becomes survival. By the time she seems over it, the bond may already be breaking. Not because she stopped caring overnight, but because silence taught her she could not keep waiting forever. When no one chases, the power does not disappear. It changes shape. From the outside, it can look balanced. Two people staying still, two people holding their ground. But under that calm surface, the balance keeps moving. At first, both may feel in control. Not texting feels strong. Silence feels like a message. I will not be the one who gives in. But power built only on restraint never stays stable for long. The longer the silence continues, the less it becomes about confidence and the more it becomes about fear. Fear of being rejected. Fear of losing the upper hand. Fear of proving the connection mattered more to you than to them. What really decides the power here is not who says nothing. It is who can emotionally survive the silence longer. The person who can tolerate the distance more easily begins to hold the advantage, even if they do not mean to. Meanwhile, the other person may be fighting the urge to reach out, replaying scenes in their mind, and quietly tying their self-worth to the absence of one message. Silence also removes correction. There is no reassurance, no clarification, no chance to say, that is not what I meant. So both people start filling the gaps on their own. And those private stories usually protect the ego more than they protect the truth. This is where misunderstanding grows fast. For a short time, distance can even increase attraction. Mystery can do that. Uncertainty can do that, but only for a while. If the pattern stays unbroken, mystery becomes distance, tension becomes disconnection. What felt like a standoff becomes a quiet exit. Real strength is not about holding out longer, it is about being able to communicate without losing self-respect. Once silence becomes the only strategy, both people lose influence over what happens next. The bond is not being carefully tested anymore. It is simply being left alone long enough to change. Silence lives on a thin line between attraction and detachment, and most people do not notice the crossing point until it is behind them. In the beginning, distance can create desire. The missing person becomes more present in the mind. Thoughts grow stronger, curiosity increases. The imagination fills the empty space, and that can make feelings feel sharper. But desire built only on absence has a time limit. Without real reinforcement, the emotional bond starts to weaken. Longing turns into uncertainty. Uncertainty turns into questions. Why have they not reached out? Do I still matter to them? Did I read everything wrong? When those questions stay unanswered long enough, the nervous system starts looking for relief. And relief does not always come through connection. Often it comes through detachment. Emotional detachment is not a dramatic switch. It is slow, quiet, almost invisible while it is happening. It begins when hope gets tired, when waiting becomes heavy, When anticipation starts feeling like stress instead of possibility, the heart does not shut off in one moment. It adapts. Feelings do not always disappear. They simply lose urgency. The thought of that person no longer creates a strong reaction, only a dull resignation. This is the shift that changes everything. Early silence can feel charged, full of possibility. Late silence can feel final. The same quiet that once created tension now starts to communicate distance, safety, and closure. And here is the dangerous part. One person may still think the silence is building attraction while the other is already stepping back emotionally. That mismatch creates the kind of distance that is hard to undo. Attraction requires emotional energy, even from far away. Detachment requires almost none. It is calm, self-protective, effortless. Once detachment takes over, reconnecting does not feel exciting anymore. It feels disruptive. That is why silence is such a gamble. It can increase desire, yes, but if it lasts too long, it can quietly end the connection without ever announcing that it has done so. At some point, silence often turns into regret. Not all at once, quietly. In the beginning, staying silent feels like a choice. It feels reversible. You tell yourself the door is still open. You could speak anytime you want. But after enough time passes, the silence changes. It no longer feels like space. It starts feeling like distance that may not be easy to cross anymore. Regret enters softly. Maybe I should have said something. Maybe they were waiting to. Maybe one message could have changed the direction of all of this. Those thoughts usually do not come in dramatic waves. They show up in normal moments. A drive home, a quiet room, a night when the mind stops being busy enough to hide from honesty. Then the replay begins. Different words, different timing, different choices. The mind starts building alternate versions of what could have happened. What makes regret so heavy is uncertainty. People do not suffer most from what they know. They suffer from what they may never know. Silence leaves questions open, and open questions become emotional weight. Did they move on because they stopped caring, or because I never showed that I still did? Silence also steals explanation. No final clarity, no real understanding, just assumptions, and assumptions are rarely gentle. Over time, the lack of communication becomes its own message, even if that message was never meant to be sent. Regret deepens when the emotional distance becomes visible. Maybe you see they are changing, growing, moving forward. Maybe it starts to feel like reaching out now, which seems strange instead of natural. That is when silence reveals the price it carried. The chance did not disappear in one big moment. It faded slowly while both people waited. And the painful truth is this: by the time pride finally relaxes, timing may already be gone. The feeling may still be there, but the moment is no longer alive in the same way. One of the biggest mistakes people make during mutual silence is believing that doing nothing is the safest move. It feels safe because it feels passive, but silence is not passive in its effect. It is still a decision, and like every decision, it shapes what comes next. By avoiding action, people think they are protecting themselves, when many times they are simply handing the outcome over to time, to assumption, and to emotional drift. Another mistake is treating silence like a tactic, instead of seeing it for what it is. Many people stay quiet because they hope the other person will break first, miss them more, or finally feel enough pressure to come back. In other words, silence becomes a test, but unspoken tests usually fail. The other person may not read your quiet as longing. They may read it as disinterest or closure. People also underestimate how fast emotions can adapt. They act like feelings will stay frozen, waiting to continue exactly where they left them. But feelings do not stay still. Without care, they change. Without reassurance, attachment begins to reorganize itself. What feels strong today may feel distant next week. Waiting does not always preserve a bond. Sometimes it quietly rewires it. Pride creates another trap. It says that reaching out means losing value, but silence led by ego is not strength. It is avoidance. Real confidence can survive vulnerability. Ego cannot. Ego wants safety more than truth. Then there is the mistake of assuming your inner world is obvious to the other person. Just because you are thinking of them does not mean they know that. Just because you care does not mean they can feel it through silence. Without communication, there is no feedback. And without feedback, imagination takes over. Many people also wait for the perfect moment, a calmer day, a clearer sign, a more certain feeling. But emotional timing does not wait forever. By the time they feel ready, the window may already be closing. Fear delays action, and delay often makes the price higher. Sooner or later, one person often feels the urge to break the silence. But feeling that urge and acting on it are two very different things. It usually starts small, a random thought, I wonder how they are doing. Then the thought returns, again and again. Curiosity turns into restlessness. The silence starts pressing harder on the mind. Still, whether someone actually reaches out depends on the conflict inside them. Emotion says, I miss them. Logic says, if they wanted to talk, they would have already. When logic wins, silence stays. When emotion wins, contact happens, though often only after long hesitation. Risk also plays a huge role. Reaching out means stepping into uncertainty. There may be no answer, a cold answer, or an answer that confirms emotional distance. For many people, imagined rejection feels worse than living with the unknown, so they stay quiet and call it protection. Timing matters too. People are more likely to break no contact when the silence stops feeling temporary and begins feeling permanent. Once hope starts changing into real loss, urgency appears. The problem is that this urgency often comes late, sometimes after the other person has already started to detach. There is also a hidden calculation in the mind. Who loses more by reaching out first? If someone believes they care more, they may stay silent just to avoid looking exposed. But what makes this almost tragic is that both people may be running the same calculation at the same time, so no one moves. In some cases, nobody breaks the silence, not because the feelings were weak, but because fear lasted longer than courage. Then silence stops being a pause and becomes the ending. And when someone finally does reach out, it is rarely loud or dramatic. It is usually careful, simple, casual on the surface, but under that simple message is something deeper, a need to know, a need for clarity, a need to stop guessing and finally face an answer, whatever that answer may be. Can people reconnect after mutual silence? Yes, but it is never guaranteed. The possibility depends less on the clock and more on emotional condition, growth, and intention. Sometimes silence gives both people enough space to reflect, calm down, and understand what they really want. In that case, it can create a reset. But silence can also harden misunderstanding, strengthen assumptions, and make emotional distance feel normal. For reconnection to happen, one person usually has to move past pride and fear. That is the hard part. Silence makes fear look wise. It makes distance look strong. It makes vulnerability look dangerous. But reconnecting requires the opposite. It requires someone to admit that the bond still matters enough to risk uncertainty. If nobody can do that, the silence becomes an ending, even if no one ever says the relationship is over. Timing matters in a subtle way too. Reconnection is more likely when the emotional bond is still alive, and neither person has fully shut down. If too much time passes, feelings adjust, attraction cools, hope fades. What once felt urgent begins to feel awkward. A message that could have opened the door earlier may now feel late, forced, or out of place. Closure, on the other hand, often comes slowly and privately. When nobody reaches out, the mind starts learning to accept the absence as real. Regret may remain, but emotional balance eventually begins to return, and closure does not always need a final conversation. Sometimes it happens inside a person through reflection, acceptance, and the painful understanding that the bond is no longer being maintained. In some cases, people reconnect only briefly, and that brief return gives them the clarity they did not have before. In other cases, silence itself becomes the teacher. It shows them what they need, what they value, and what this connection could or could not offer, so the chance of reunion or closure depends on awareness, readiness, and courage. Silence creates room for both. It promises neither. The final truth is simple, but people still miss it. Mutual silence is never empty. It may look like a pause, a break, a waiting period, a strategy, but underneath, it is always doing something. It is shaping feeling. It is shaping perception. It is shaping outcome. Silence does not erase attachment. It changes it. Longing can become doubt. Doubt can become distance. Distance can become regret, and all of that can happen without one spoken sentence. Silence reveals the real structure of a connection. It shows who is attached, who can sit with discomfort, who protects pride more than honesty, Who confuses avoidance with strength? It strips away noise and leaves both people alone with what they actually feel. That is why silence can feel so intense even when nothing is happening outside. Inside, a lot is happening. The mind starts writing stories where there is no information. Some stories are hopeful, some are painful, most are incomplete. Yet people often believe those private stories more than they believe reality, because reality has gone quiet. That is why silence can act like a mirror. It reflects insecurity, desire, fear, and all the things that were easier to hide when there was still contact. In the end, silence is a test with no instructions. It can build tension for a little while, yes, but it can also slowly break the bond completely. What happens depends on timing, self-awareness, and the willingness to face vulnerability before it is too late. Silence guarantees nothing except this. It will reveal what both people choose when no comfort is offered and no script is given. So never assume silence means nothing. It is powerful, but it is passive. And if you leave it alone too long, it will make the decision for both of you. That is the real danger. Not just losing the person, but losing the chance to know what might have happened if someone had found the courage to speak.